Your time here is over. 6 words. Final. Cold. Rehearsed. The new CFO delivered them like a line he'd practiced in the mirror. 3 months in the company and already flexing authority, eager to show the board he could cut costs, take control, leave a mark. He thought firing me would prove his strength. 15 years. That's how long I'd carried this company. I kept its numbers alive, its forecasts breathing, its future predictable. While executives celebrated bonuses and promotions, I was the one turning chaos into order. And this man thought he could erase me in a sentence. Around the boardroom, silence spread like smoke. No one defended me. No one spoke. Loyalty dies quickly in corporate air. They all kept their heads down, waiting for the moment to pass. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I smiled. Good luck without me. 5 words. Calm, sharp, and final. The CFO's smirk cracked. Not much. Just a flicker, quick enough to catch if you were watching closely. He covered it with arrogance, called security, and waved me away like I was already a ghost. I stood slowly, adjusted my jacket, and walked out. No anger. No shouting. No slammed doors. That would have been a gift to him. Instead, I gave him silence, the kind that lingers longer than rage. Because he didn't understand yet. You don't fire the architect and expect the building to stand. 15 years. That's what they'd erased. 15 years of decisions guided by my systems. When the market crashed, my models had shielded them from ruin. When competitors folded, my forecasts kept our growth steady. When the board demanded miracles, I delivered them, quietly, precisely, without ever asking for applause. Executives called it leadership. The CEO called it strategy. The board called it vision. But it was me. Always me. They thought they were running the company. They weren't. They were reading my numbers, following my charts, trusting the invisible work I built while they slept. And now they had cut me out. What they didn't realize was that my work wasn't just built for them. It was built through me. Every model, every forecast, every structure carried my imprint. My logic wasn't on the surface, it was in the bones. Remove me, and everything collapses. They thought tomorrow would look like business as usual. They thought the numbers would still flow, the forecasts would still predict, the board would still be impressed. Wrong. Tomorrow, every system would fail. Every projection would lock. Every model would freeze. And across the screens, one phrase would repeat. Access denied. That night, I didn't break down. I didn't drown in self-pity. I didn't curse the CFO's name. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and looked at 15 years of archives. My backups. My frameworks. My designs. Everything I had built, protected, perfected. The company thought they owned my work. They didn't. They only rented it, and they had just canceled their lease without knowing what came next. Because here's the truth, I never built systems that worked without me. Not by accident. By design. Not sabotage. Not malice. Just reality. The accuracy of those models didn't come from formulas alone, it came from me. My mind. My insight. My patterns. Remove me, and you don't just lose an employee. You lose the foundation. The CFO hadn't fired staff. He had amputated the company's brain. And tomorrow, they'd find out what that really meant. I could already picture the scene. Morning. The board asking for numbers. The CEO waiting for his proud presentation. The CFO, sweating behind his polished grin, trying to pull reports that wouldn't open. Locked. Jammed. Silent. Where are the numbers? The board would ask. And the answer would be staring back at them in red letters. Access denied. They wouldn't know where to turn. They wouldn't know who to call. Because the one person who could fix it, the one person who had the keys, was the one they had walked out the door. Me. People think revenge is about shouting, about explosions, about dramatic exits. It isn't. Real revenge is silent. It's the absence that burns. I didn't need to sabotage anything. I didn't need to destroy files or plant traps. All I had to do was leave. Because they had built their empire on me, and without me, it wasn't an empire at all. It was a hollow shell waiting to crack. And I had just given it the push. The CFO thought firing me was a victory. He thought he'd proven his strength. But what he didn't understand was simple: you can't prove strength by cutting off the arm that holds you up. Tomorrow, when the boardroom lights flickered, when the executives scrambled, when the CEO's voice shook on the phone, they would all realize the same truth. They hadn't fired a person. They had fired their future. And their future was already gone. I didn't wait in despair. I waited in certainty. Because I knew the phone would ring. The panic would come. The empire would choke on its silence. And when they finally reached for me, begging for answers, I wouldn't need to shout. I wouldn't need to remind them of loyalty, of sacrifice, of years of devotion. All I'd have to do was remind them of what they already knew but refused to admit. You don't erase the one who built the blueprint. And when you try, the blueprint erases you. The last thing they'd see before the collapse? 2 words flashing across every system, every report, every forecast they thought they controlled. Access denied. The next morning, the first call came before sunrise. It wasn't from a manager, not from HR, not from some junior panicking, it was the CEO himself. His number lit up my phone, a number that had never once appeared on my screen in all my years at the company. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was tight, rushed, already breaking under pressure. "Where are the reports?" he demanded. I stayed silent long enough for him to repeat himself. "They're not loading. Every terminal shows the same thing: access denied." I didn't ask questions. I didn't offer help. I simply said, "That's unfortunate," and ended the call. Minutes later, another call. This time from the CFO, the same man who had smirked as he fired me the day before. His voice was no longer smug. "Listen," he started, "something's gone wrong with the financial systems. The board meeting is in 2 hours. None of the revenue models are available. Where did you store them?" I smiled to myself. For 14 years, they never cared where I stored them, how I built them, or how I secured them. Now, suddenly, it mattered. I didn't reply. I let the silence burn. Eventually, I said only one sentence. "You should have thought of that before you escorted me out." He tried to bargain. His voice dropped from arrogance to pleading in seconds. "We can renegotiate your exit package. Just tell me where the files are." I ended the call. By the time the board convened, chaos was already spreading. Directors arrived expecting the usual precise forecasts, the models that guided billion-dollar decisions. Instead, screens flashed with locked dashboards. Every attempt to override the system circled back to one phrase: access denied. They tried every trick. IT worked around the clock. Analysts scrambled through old folders. But the truth was unavoidable. The company's heartbeat had always pulsed through systems I personally designed, systems only I fully understood. I began receiving desperate emails. First polite. Then urgent. Then panicked. "Please call us. We need your help. This is affecting investor confidence." I ignored every single one. Hours later, another call. This time, the COO. We'll pay consulting rates. Just come back for 1 week. Fix the issue, hand it over, and walk away with double your severance. The offer was laughable. They thought money could erase what they had done. They thought I would crawl back to save them. Instead, I gave him the same sentence I had given the CFO. Good luck without me. Word spread quickly inside. Employees whispered about the meltdown. Shareholders began calling in. Stock price trembled as rumors leaked. The board, furious, demanded answers. Executives pointed fingers at one another. The CFO insisted IT had failed. IT insisted leadership ignored warnings. But behind closed doors, every single one of them knew the truth. They had built their empire on one foundation, me, and now that foundation was gone. The CEO tried to project control. At the board table, he insisted the issue was temporary. He promised resolution within 24 hours. He had no idea how wrong he was. Because the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. It recognized unauthorized access. It locked out anyone who didn't have clearance. And now, clearance was gone with me. Investors started asking questions. Competitors caught wind. Rumors spread through industry channels. The giant was suddenly bleeding. The CFO tried again that evening. This time, no arrogance. No negotiation. Only desperation. Listen, he said, his voice cracking, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have forced you out. Just, please, tell me how to unlock the systems. If this board meeting fails tomorrow, I lose everything. You don't understand. But I did understand. I understood perfectly. He thought firing me would make him powerful. He thought removing me would prove he was in control. What he never realized was that control had always been mine. Quiet, invisible, unacknowledged, but absolute. I let him finish his panicked speech. Then I gave him the final answer. You don't get to fire the foundation of a company and expect the walls to stand. You built nothing. You only destroyed. And now you can live with that. He begged. Actually begged. The man who had once looked down on me now pleaded like a child. I hung up. The fallout was immediate. The next board meeting collapsed into shouting. Directors demanded numbers that didn't exist. They demanded accountability that couldn't be provided. The CEO's authority disintegrated in front of his own people. Every minute they delayed, the company bled more. Contracts stalled. Deals froze. Auditors circled. And through it all, one phrase echoed through their systems, through their boardroom screens, through their investor calls: access denied. They thought I was replaceable. They thought loyalty meant nothing. They thought erasing my name would erase my value. But the truth stared them in the face. My name was everywhere. My work was everywhere. My fingerprint was the architecture itself. And without me, the empire they stole was nothing more than a castle of sand. The calls didn't stop. Every 5 minutes, another number flashed on my phone. The CFO's office, the CEO's assistant, board members I hadn't heard from in years. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They already knew why things weren't working. By noon, they tried sending an IT team into the system I built. They thought brute force would get them in. Password resets, admin overrides, even pulling servers offline. It didn't matter. Every door they opened only led to another lock, another dead end. My architecture wasn't just a collection of files, it was a living system. It recognized them as intruders, and it shut them out. That's when the panic shifted from frustration to fear. The CFO stormed into the CEO's office, his voice loud enough that even staff outside heard every word. "This is sabotage," he shouted. "She's holding us hostage." The CEO didn't respond right away. He was pale, staring at the dashboard on the projector screen, millions in pending transactions stuck in limbo, contracts frozen, forecasts blank. All of it connected back to one point. Me. "Finally," he said, "she warned us. She said good luck without her." The CFO slammed the table. "We have investors waiting for numbers, regulators expecting compliance reports, and half our clients threatening to pull contracts if they don't get answers. This isn't luck, this is collapse." And he was right. The collapse had already started. The irony was that they always underestimated me. For years, they thought of me as replaceable, a background figure who made things run while they chased titles and spotlight. But what they never saw was that every shortcut they took, every deal they signed without thinking, every promise they made to clients, they leaned on my systems to make it possible. Without me, every one of those shortcuts became a trap. Inside the finance team, panic turned into accusations. Analysts pointed fingers at managers, managers blamed directors, directors whispered that the CFO had pushed me out too fast. Nobody trusted anyone. They weren't just losing data, they were losing control of the story. And in corporate life, losing the story is the first step toward losing everything. The first cracks showed publicly at the quarterly earnings call. Investors dialed in expecting smooth numbers, confident forecasts, and the same calm arrogance the executives always delivered. Instead, the CFO stumbled through excuses. "We're experiencing technical transitions, temporary adjustments, minor disruptions," he said, his voice cracking. But the numbers weren't temporarily disrupted. They were gone. The models, the risk forecasts, the predictive reports, everything investors relied on to trust the company's growth, were locked behind the very safeguards I had written. Questions flooded in. "Where are the projections? How can you assure us if you can't even access your own systems? Why was this allowed to happen?" The CFO froze. His rehearsed script meant nothing. Investors didn't want spin, they wanted answers. And without me, he had none. By the end of the call, the company's stock had dropped 7%. Inside the boardroom that evening, the conversation turned ugly. One director slammed his hand on the table. "Who approved firing her?" The CEO tried to deflect. "It was a collective decision." The director shot back, "Don't lie. We all know this came from the CFO's office. You signed off without understanding what she controlled." The CFO tried to fight back. "She didn't control anything we can't rebuild." Another director leaned forward. "Then rebuild it. Why hasn't it been done?" Silence. "Because they couldn't." Meanwhile, I sat at home, calm, watching everything unfold from the distance of silence. I didn't need to speak. My absence spoke for me. I thought back to the years they dismissed me in meetings. The times I raised warnings only to be brushed aside with a smug, "We'll handle it." The long nights I stayed to clean up after their reckless deals. The promotions they skipped over me to hand to their friends. And now, all of that negligence was circling back to them like a storm they couldn't escape. The realization finally hit them: I wasn't the background. I was the foundation. The collapse deepened when clients started calling directly. Contracts worth millions depended on my reports, my forecasts, my compliance guarantees. Without those, clients had no reason to stay. One by one, the calls came in. "If you can't deliver by Friday, we're terminating the contract. We're moving to competitors who can guarantee stability. Your reputation is at risk, and we won't go down with you." The CEO begged for patience, promising solutions. But clients didn't care about promises. They wanted results. And results were locked away. Inside the company, desperation turned into chaos. Executives worked overnight, not to fix the problem, they couldn't, but to cover themselves. Everyone started building alibis, emails proving they raised concerns, messages showing they had no part in the decision. Nobody wanted to be the one blamed when the collapse reached the media. And it was only a matter of time before it did. The true breaking point came from regulators. For years, I had been the one filing compliance reports, ensuring accuracy, and closing loopholes before they became violations. It was quiet, invisible work the executives never understood, never valued. Now, those same regulators wanted reports that no one else knew how to generate. Letters arrived. Then calls. Then formal notices of non-compliance. Penalties were scheduled. Audits were announced. Suddenly, the executives realized they weren't just losing money, they were risking shutdowns, investigations, and personal liability. All because they thought I was replaceable. The CEO called me one last time. He didn't sound arrogant anymore. He sounded defeated. "We need you back. Name your price." For a moment, I considered answering. Not to help, but to see just how far he'd beg. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about negotiation anymore. This was about truth. The truth that I had carried them for years, the truth they never admitted, the truth that now burned in every collapsing report and every failed meeting. I was the system. And without me, there was nothing left. By the end of the week, the company's stock had fallen 22%. Clients were leaving faster than they could call them back. Regulators had opened formal investigations. And inside the executive floor, every meeting ended the same way: silence, tension, and the unspoken acknowledgement that the decision to discard me had set fire to everything they built. But for me, there was no fire. Only clarity. They thought they buried me with humiliation. They thought they erased me with a signature. But the truth was simple: they hadn't buried me. They had buried themselves. And I was just watching it happen. The boardroom turned into a war zone. Executives shuffled in with laptops open, screens glowing with nothing but the same error message: access denied. Their quarterly financials were gone. Their forecasting models, missing. Their client trust reports, erased from visibility. Every single thing they needed to answer the board's questions was locked behind the very framework they had dismissed me for building. At first, they blamed IT. The CIO barked orders, demanding emergency access. He swore the servers were fine, that the databases were running, that backups were ready. But every attempt ended the same: access denied. He tried administrator overrides. He tried legacy passwords. Nothing worked. The architecture wasn't just software. It was logic. And I was the only one who had the key. The CFO who smirked during my firing now sat drenched in sweat. He hadn't imagined a single spreadsheet, a single contract, a single report could all be tied back to my structure. For years, he thought my quiet presence meant replaceable. What he never saw was that I designed every report not as a file but as a living ecosystem, rules feeding rules, dependencies building on dependencies. Remove me, and the system didn't collapse, it rejected them. The CEO's phone buzzed non-stop. Investors demanded clarity. Clients wanted updates. Regulators requested compliance documents. None of them could be produced. For the first time, the board wasn't impressed with excuses. They wanted results. And results were impossible without me. The panic spread fast. Staff whispered in hallways about how the company's leaders had fired the one person holding everything together. Stories leaked. Competitors began calling clients, hinting at instability. The CIO finally admitted defeat: "We can't fix this. We need her." The CEO snapped back: "We're not calling her. She's gone." But his voice betrayed him. He knew the truth. His empire, the empire he thought he controlled, was slipping from his grip. Meanwhile, the CFO made a desperate attempt to cover himself. He printed old quarterly numbers, copied outdated reports, and tried to pass them off as current. It took 5 minutes for the board to notice the inconsistencies. His voice cracked as they grilled him. Why are these projections 3 months old? Where is the current data? He had no answer. The COO stepped in, trying to calm the storm, promising that everything was under control. But the board wasn't listening anymore. They saw what was happening. The company wasn't running on leadership, or strategy, or vision. It had been running on me. The silence in that room was heavier than any explosion. Because they finally understood, loyalty isn't loud. It's invisible. It's the hands that keep the machine turning while others take the credit. They had taken those hands away. And now, the machine was tearing itself apart. The worst part for them? This wasn't sabotage. I hadn't touched a single thing after I left. I hadn't sent viruses or deleted files. I hadn't hacked or broken in. The system was designed to trust only its builder. The rules were already there. The access controls, the layered authentications, the cross-check dependencies, they had all approved them years ago, never reading the fine print because it was technical. And now, those same rules had become walls they couldn't climb. The CEO tried one last desperate move. He brought in an external consulting firm, specialists in data recovery and system forensics. They billed thousands per hour and promised miracles. Within 48 hours, they gave up. Their report was brutal. The architecture is proprietary. No standard bypass exists. Full functionality is dependent on the original designer's credentials and sequence protocols. In other words, only I could unlock it. The board's patience cracked. They demanded to know why I was fired. They demanded to know who authorized the decision. The CFO shifted blame. The CEO dodged questions. But the truth was already out in the open. Their arrogance had cost them their empire. Meanwhile, clients started pulling contracts. Competitors offered discounts to lure them away. What had taken decades to build began dissolving in weeks. And inside those walls, chaos wasn't just operational, it was personal. The CFO's reputation evaporated overnight. The CIO faced questions about his competence. The CEO's leadership was openly mocked by the very people who once applauded him. All while I remained silent. Not a single email. Not a single word. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I didn't lift a hand against them. I simply let their own choices unfold. The empire that had discarded me was now collapsing on itself, brick by brick, report by report, client by client. And with every fall, one truth echoed louder: they hadn't fired an employee. They had fired the foundation. And the foundation doesn't beg to be needed. The foundation waits. Silent. Watching. Knowing the walls above cannot stand without it. The silence became the loudest weapon I ever used. No arguments, no explanations, no desperate attempts to prove myself. Just silence, and a system they could not control. The executives thought they had won when they escorted me out of the office. They thought replacing me with someone younger, someone cheaper, would make them look smart in front of the board. But what they didn't realize was simple: my fingerprints were on everything. The financial models, the reporting systems, the hidden checks, the code that powered their forecasts, every single part of it carried my design. When I walked out, I didn't take anything. I didn't sabotage. I didn't delete. I didn't even raise my voice. But what I left behind was even worse than destruction. I left them a machine that required me. The first week after my exit, they tried bravado. The CFO stood in front of the board and claimed everything was under control. Numbers would be on time. Projections would be flawless. We've transitioned smoothly, he bragged. But behind that fake confidence, the system was already closing its doors. Reports didn't load. Forecasts returned errors. Simple requests turned into blank screens with one message repeating, access denied. The panic started small, analysts whispering, managers complaining, directors scrambling. But soon, it spread to the very top. The board demanded numbers. Investors demanded clarity. Regulators demanded filings. And all the CFO could offer was excuses. Every time they tried to override, the system shut them out. Every shortcut they tried backfired. Every attempt to rebuild collapsed under its own weight. They were trapped inside a structure they didn't understand, one I had designed to be airtight, efficient, and, without me, impossible. The CEO himself called me one evening. His voice was different now. No arrogance, no authority. Just desperation. We need your help, he admitted. I let the silence stretch. Then I answered with one line. You should have thought of that before you escorted me out. I hung up. The next morning, the market responded. The company's stock plummeted as whispers spread, missed reports, delayed filings, leadership in chaos. Rivals pounced, clients questioned contracts, investors smelled blood. What once looked like a fortress was now cracking in full view of everyone. Inside, meetings turned into chaos. Executives pointed fingers, directors blamed leadership, leadership blamed staff. But the truth was undeniable. The one person who had held the system together was gone, and they had thrown her out with a smirk. The CFO who orchestrated my exit tried to hide. He claimed it was technical delays, temporary bugs, easily fixable. But every time he spoke, another failure surfaced. Another department collapsed. Another investor walked away. The same man who once mocked me was now drowning in front of the same audience that cheered his arrogance. And me? I didn't have to move a muscle. I didn't have to write an email. I didn't have to say a word. My silence was louder than their excuses. 3 months later, the CFO was gone. Fired in disgrace. His reputation shattered, his career reduced to a cautionary tale. The CEO followed shortly after. The board, furious and humiliated, purged half the leadership team. But by then, the company was already bleeding too heavily. Competitors absorbed their clients. Investors shifted their money. The market closed in. What once had been their empire was now rubble scattered in plain sight. And still, across every broken report, across every failed forecast, across every unanswered request, the same 2 words appeared again and again, access denied. That was my revenge. Not in anger. Not in fire. But in silence. In patience. In watching the empire they tried to steal from me collapse under the weight of their arrogance. They thought they had ended my story. But really, I had ended theirs. Subscribe to Revenge and Reveal, where every betrayal meets its payback, and every secret gets exposed.